The massive Zephyrian battlecruiser cast a shadow over 3 moons as it moved through space. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his back. His purple skin gleamed under the ship's bright lights. He watched the small human fleet ahead with what humans might call amusement. "Look at them," he said to his second-in-command. 12 tiny ships spread out like insects. "Do they think this will stop us?" Commander Kalanoth clicked his mandibles together. This was how his species showed agreement. "The humans are new to space war, Admiral. They do not understand proper battle formations." Vextar had conquered 47 star systems for the Empire. Every time, the enemy had met him in honorable combat. Fleet against fleet, ship against ship, the stronger side always won. It was the natural way of war in the galaxy. The human ships looked pathetic compared to his battle cruisers. Each Zephyrian ship was 3 times larger than the biggest human vessel. Their weapons could destroy planets. Their shields could stop any attack. The humans had spread their little ships across 3 different planets instead of gathering them together for a real fight. "They have no discipline," Vextar said. "No understanding of military science. This will be over quickly." Down on the planet called Kepler 442b, Captain Jake Morrison lay flat on his belly behind a pile of rocks. He held a rifle that would have looked familiar to any soldier from Earth's past wars. The weapon was simple, but effective. Jake had used guns like this in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the streets of Detroit before humanity reached the stars. Jake peered through his scope at the valley below. 3 enormous Zephyrian landing ships had touched down an hour ago. Thousands of alien soldiers poured out in perfect straight lines. They wore shiny armor and carried glowing energy weapons. They marched like they were in a parade. "Lisa, you seeing this?" Jake whispered into his radio. Lieutenant Lisa Parker was hidden 2 kilometers away on another hill. "I see them, Jake. They're walking in the open like they own the place." "Maybe they think they do," said Sergeant Down Collins. He lay next to Jake with a pair of binoculars. "Count about 3,000 troops down there, all walking in nice neat rows." Jake had seen this kind of mistake before. When he was young, he had fought against enemies who thought superior numbers and better weapons meant automatic victory. They had learned the hard way that war was not that simple. The Zephyrian troops moved across the open ground toward the human settlement. Their energy shields shimmered around them like soap bubbles. Their plasma rifles hummed with power. They looked unstoppable, but Jake knew something the aliens did not understand. In war, it did not matter how strong you were if the enemy could hit you and you could not hit back. "Target the officers first," Jake said into his radio. "The ones with the fancy armor and the big weapons?" "Copy that," Lisa replied. "I can see their command group from here. Guy in the front looks important." Jake studied the alien formation through his scope. The Zephyrians had made every mistake that young soldiers made. They stayed bunched together. They walked in predictable patterns. They made themselves easy targets, the Lead alien war armor that was different from the others, brighter, more decorative, probably a commander. Jake adjusted his scope for distance and wind. The computer in his rifle calculated the shot automatically. "Range, 1,500 meters, Don whispered. "Wind from the east at 10 kilometers per hour. Jake had made harder shots than this. The alien commander walked in a straight line at a steady pace. He never looked around for danger. He probably thought his shields made him safe. "Lisa, when I take my shot, you hit the one on the left flank. The big guy with the red markings. Got him in my sights." Jake controlled his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. His finger found the trigger. The alien commander took another step forward, then another. Jake squeezed the trigger. The rifle made a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. The bullet traveled faster than sound. It covered 1,500 meters in less than 2 seconds. The Zephyrian commander's energy shield might stop plasma bolts, but it was not designed for solid projectiles moving at hypersonic speed. The alien's head exploded in a spray of purple blood. His body fell forward into the dirt. The perfect formation suddenly stopped as soldiers looked around in confusion. 3 seconds later, Lisa's rifle cracked from her position. Another officer fell, this one on the left side of the formation. The aliens began to panic. What is happening? Commander Kellanoth demanded from the bridge of the battlecruiser. Unknown, sir, replied the communications officer. Ground forces report they are under attack, but they cannot locate the enemy. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display. Show me their positions. Sir, we cannot detect the attackers. The signatures are too small for our sensors. This made no sense to Vextar. How could an enemy attack without being detected? Where were their battle formations? Where were their heavy weapons? Down in the valley, the Zephyrian troops tried to follow their training. When attacked, they were supposed to form defensive circles with overlapping fields of fire. This had worked against every enemy they had ever faced, but it made Jake's job easier. When the aliens bunched together, he could see their officers more clearly, the ones giving orders. The ones the other soldiers followed. Target-rich environment. Don muttered, watching through his binoculars. Jake had already moved to his second firing position. He had prepared 5 different spots before the battle started. Shoot and move. Basic infantry tactics that every human soldier learned. The aliens were still looking toward his first position. When his rifle cracked again, another officer fell. Then Lisa fired from her hill. Another alien dropped. They cannot find us, Lisa reported. They are shooting at shadows. The Zephyrian troops began firing their plasma weapons at the hillsides. Bright bolts of energy struck rocks and trees. But Jake and his team were already gone from those positions. Sir, the ground commander reported to Admiral Vextar, we have lost 5 officers and 30 soldiers. The enemy appears to be using long-range weapons from concealed positions. How many attackers are there? Unknown, sir. Based on the accuracy and speed of fire, we estimate at least 100 snipers with advanced cloaking technology. Vextar felt something he had never experienced in 47 conquests. Uncertainty. His troops were being picked apart by an enemy they could not see or find? This was not how war was supposed to work. Deploy the search drones, he ordered. Find these snipers and destroy them. But the drones found nothing. Jake and his 11 soldiers moved through the landscape like ghosts. They used terrain that the aliens did not understand. They hid in places that orbital sensors could not detect. Jake watched the confusion in the valley below. The perfect Zephyrian formation had collapsed into chaos. Soldiers ran for cover behind rocks and trees. Officers shouted orders that one could hear over the sound of plasma fire. Dan, you see that cluster of troops near the big boulder? Got them, about 20 aliens trying to hide. Their mistake, Jake said, adjusting his scope. Bunching up just makes them easier to hit. He fired again. The bullet found its target. Another alien fell, and the others scattered in panic. Admiral Vextar watched his ground forces fall apart. For the first time in his military career, he began to understand that there might be more to war than superior firepower and larger armies. The humans were teaching him a lesson he would never forget. The Zephyrian troops had never experienced fear like this before. In 47 conquered systems, they had always known where their enemies were. Now they faced an invisible threat that struck without warning. Commander Zekamor tried to restore order to his scattered forces. He stood behind a large rock, shouting commands through his communicator. Form defensive positions. Overlapping fields of fire. Find those attackers. His words were brave, but his voice shook. 3 of his best officers were already dead. Purple. Blood stained the valley floor where they had fallen, 2 kilometers away. Jake Morrison watched the alien commander through his rifle scope. The Zephyrian wore fancy armor with gold trim. He was clearly someone important. Jake could see the alien's mouth moving as he gave orders. Dan, you got range on the guy behind the big rock? The one with the shiny armor? Sergeant Dan Collins adjusted his spotting scope. 1,800 meters. Wind still from the east. He thinks that rock makes him safe. Jake smiled grimly. The rock would stop plasma bolts, but it would not stop his bullet. He had learned to shoot in the mountains of Colorado before joining the army. Distance shots were his specialty. Lisa, you copy? I'm taking the commander. You hit the group by the fallen tree? Roger that, Jake. I count 8 targets clustered together. Easy shot. Jake controlled his breathing and lined up the shot. The alien commander was peeking around the edge of his rock cover. Just enough of his head showed for a clean kill. Jake squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley. The bullet struck the alien commander in the temple. His head snapped back and he collapsed behind the rock. His golden armor was now decorated with purple blood, too. Seconds later, Lisa's rifle fired from her position. The group of aliens by the fallen tree scattered as one of their number fell. But they were running in the open now, making themselves perfect targets. Moving to position 3, Jake said into his radio. He and Dan crawled backward from their shooting position, keeping low behind the rocks. They had planned this movement. Before the battle started, the Zephyrian troops fired wildly at the hillside where Jake's shot had come from. Bright plasma bolts struck rocks and trees, leaving black scorch marks. But the humans were already gone. Where are they? Screamed Lieutenant Vexcall, now the highest-ranking officer left alive. How can they disappear like that? His soldiers had no answers. They had trained to fight enemies who stood and fought. Enemies who used energy weapons and force fields. Enemies who played by the same rules they did. These humans were different. They killed from distances that seemed impossible. They vanished like ghosts. They struck without warning and disappeared before anyone could fight back. Admiral Vexstar paced his bridge like a caged animal. His tactical officers showed him sensor readings that made no sense. "Report," he demanded. "Sir, we have lost 9 officers and 43 soldiers in the past hour. The enemy continues to attack from unknown positions." "What do our ground sensors show?" "Nothing, sir. No energy signatures. No movement patterns. The attacks seem to come from empty ground." Vexstar studied the battlefield display. His forces were spread across the valley in small groups, each one trying to find cover. This was not the organized advance he had planned. His troops were being hunted like animals. "Perhaps the humans have developed new stealth technology," suggested Commander Kelenoff. "Something our sensors cannot detect. Then counter it," Vexstar snapped. "Use thermal imaging. Use motion detectors. Use everything we have." Down in the valley, Jake had reached his 3rd firing position. This spot gave him a view of the entire battlefield. He could see the alien troops huddled behind rocks and trees, afraid to move in the open. "They're learning," Don observed. "Not walking in straight lines anymore?" "Good for them," Jake replied. "But they're still thinking like parade ground soldiers." Jake was right. The Zephyrians had moved to defensive positions, but they were still bunched together. They still moved in predictable patterns. They still had not learned the first rule of fighting snipers: spread out and keep moving. Through his scope, Jake spotted a group of 6 aliens trying to move from one rock formation to another. They ran together in a tight group, thinking their numbers would protect them. Jake picked the alien in the lead. He was probably a sergeant or squad leader based on his equipment. Jake fired and the alien dropped. The others scattered, but now they were in the open with no cover. Lisa's rifle cracked from her hill. Another alien fell. Then Jake fired again. A 3rd alien went down. The survivors reached cover, but their confidence was shattered. "Sir," the communications officer reported to Admiral Vexstar. "Lieutenant Vexcall is requesting permission to withdraw to the landing craft." "Withdraw?" Vexstar could not believe what he was hearing. "We have 3,000 troops on the surface." "How many enemies are they fighting?" "Unknown, sir. Lieutenant Vexcall estimates between 50 and 100 snipers based on the rate of fire." Vexstar felt his stomach twist. 100 snipers were holding off 3,000 of his best soldiers. This was impossible according to everything he knew about warfare. Tell him to press the attack. Use smoke grenades for cover. Advance in small groups. Find these snipers and destroy them. But the Zephyrian troops were beyond following complex orders. They were scared and confused. Many had never seen combat before. They had expected an easy victory against primitive humans. Instead, they were dying one by one, picked off by an enemy they could not see or fight back against. Jake watched The aliens try to organize another advance. They were using smoke grenades now, filling the valley with purple clouds, but thermal scopes could see through smoke. The aliens were just making it harder for themselves to coordinate. Thermal imaging online, Jake reported. I can see them. Moving through the smoke like watching ghosts. He picked his targets carefully. The aliens were moving in small groups now, which was smarter. But they were still following their training. They moved in straight lines from cover to cover. They stopped in predictable places. Jake fired 3 shots in quick succession. 3 aliens fell in the purple smoke. The others dove for cover, but some picked spots that would not stop his bullets. Lisa, you got the group moving along the ridgeline? I see them. 4 targets in single file, taking the shot now. Her rifle cracked. The lead alien in the group fell. The others tried to run back the way they came, but Jake was already tracking them. His bullet caught the second alien in the back. The remaining 2 reached cover, but they were too scared to move again. Sir, Lieutenant Vexcall's voice came through the communicator. We cannot advance. The enemy has complete fire superiority. Request immediate support. Admiral Vexstar felt something crack inside his chest. In 47 conquered systems, no enemy had ever stopped his ground forces. His troops were the best in the galaxy. They had the finest equipment, the most advanced training, the strongest weapons, but they were being defeated by humans using primitive projectile weapons. Weapons that should have been obsolete centuries ago. Prepare the orbital bombardment, he said quietly. Sir? Commander Kelenoff looked shocked. Our troops are still on the surface, then recall them. All of them, now. The retreat order went out to the surviving Zephyrian forces. They ran back toward their landing craft, abandoning their positions and their wounded. Many threw away their weapons to run faster. Jake watched the aliens flee through his scope. They're running, he reported. All of them. Should we pursue? Lisa asked. Negative. Let them go. We've made our point. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The aliens would be back with bigger guns and different tactics. They had learned that humans were not the easy targets they had expected. Admiral Vexstar stood alone on his bridge, watching his forces retreat in disorder. For the first time in his career he had been defeated. Not by superior numbers or better technology, but by an enemy who fought in ways he did not understand. The humans had taught him that war was not always about who had the strongest weapons. Sometimes it was about who knew how to use them best. The Zephyrian retreat lasted only 2 hours. Admiral Vexstar could not accept defeat from a handful of primitive humans. His pride would not allow it. By midday, 3 more landing craft had touched down in the valley, bringing fresh troops and new equipment. This time we do it properly, Vexstar told his officers. No more parade ground formations, small squads. Heavy armor, constant movement. Commander Kelenoff studied the new battle plan. The troops are nervous, Admiral. Word of the morning's defeat has spread through the ranks. Then they will fight harder to prove themselves, Vexstar replied. But he could see the doubt in his officer's eyes. The mighty Zephyrian military machine was showing cracks. Jake Morrison watched the new alien deployment from his 4th firing position. The enemy had learned some lessons. They were not marching in straight lines anymore. Instead, they moved in small groups of 8 to 10 soldiers, using cover and trying to stay spread out. They're adapting, Don Collins observed through his spotting scope. Not as dumb as they looked this morning. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But they're still making mistakes. The biggest mistake was tactical. The Zephyrians were still thinking like conventional soldiers. They moved from cover to cover in predictable patterns. They gathered in obvious defensive positions. They had no understanding of how snipers really operated. Lisa, you seeing the group moving through the canyon? Lieutenant Lisa Parker was now in her 3rd position, 2.5 kilometers from Jake's location. Got them. 12 aliens in. Single file. They think the canyon walls will protect them. Perfect kill zone, Jake said. 1 way in, 1 way out. Take the one in back first. Copy that. Trapping them in the canyon. This was basic military tactics that every human soldier learned. When enemies moved through a confined space, you killed the ones in back first. That way, the ones in front could not retreat. They would be trapped and confused. Lisa's rifle cracked. The last alien in the column dropped dead. The others spun around, not understanding what had happened. They saw their comrade's body but could not tell where the shot had come from. Jake adjusted his scope and fired at the front of the column. The lead alien fell, blocking the narrow path. Now the survivors were trapped in the middle of the canyon with dead bodies on both sides. Panic setting in, Don reported. They're running around like headless chickens. The trapped aliens fired their plasma weapons at the canyon walls, trying to hit an enemy they could not see. The energy bolts struck rock and exploded in showers of sparks. But Jake and Lisa were far above them, hidden behind ridge lines. The aliens could not even see. Jake picked off 2 more aliens with careful shots. Lisa got another one. The survivors finally tried to climb the steep canyon walls, but that made them even easier targets. They were silhouetted against the light-colored rock, moving slowly and predictably. In 5 minutes, the entire squad was dead. Canyon clear, Jake reported, moving to position 5. Admiral Vexstar received the report with growing anger. 12 more dead? How is this possible? Sir, the enemy appears to be using the terrain against us. They have superior knowledge of the local geography. Then get me detailed maps. Use the orbital scanners. But maps could not solve the real problem. The Zephyrians were fighting an enemy who understood warfare in ways they had never encountered. Every tactical decision they made played into human hands. Jake and his team had studied this battlefield for weeks before the aliens arrived. They knew every rock, every ridge, every hiding place. They had prepared fighting positions and escape routes. They had cache supplies and ammunition in dozens of locations. Most importantly, they understood something the aliens did not. War was not about having the best equipment or the most soldiers. It was about using what you had in the smartest way possible. Incoming, 2 o'clock, Don whispered. It looks like a whole platoon trying to flank us through the hills. Jake swung his rifle toward the new threat. The aliens were moving in a long line across the hillside, staying low and using whatever cover they could find. Someone in their command structure was finally thinking, but they were still making basic errors. They were all moving in the same direction. They were staying bunched together. And they were silhouetted against the sky. 35 targets? Jake counted. Range, 1,000 meters. Lisa, can you hit them from your position? Negative. Too much rock in the way. This one's all yours. Jake studied the enemy formation. If he started shooting from this position, they would spot his muzzle flash and return fire. But he had planned for this situation too. Dan, remember the rock slide we set up on the north slope? Don grinned. The one with the remote detonator? Oh, this is going to be good. Jake pulled a small device from his pack. It looked like a simple radio, but it was connected to explosive charges they had placed 3 days ago. The charges were hidden under a pile of loose rocks above the path. The aliens were taking fire in the hole, Jake whispered and pressed the button. The explosion echoed across the hills like thunder. Tons of rock and dirt cascaded down the slope, burying the alien formation under an avalanche. The survivors emerged from the rock slide. Bloodied and confused, perfect targets for Jake's rifle, he fired rapidly, picking off the aliens as they struggled to escape the debris. His shots were not as precise as usual, but at this range accuracy was less important than speed. Every bullet found a target. Avalanche complete, Jake reported. 35 enemies neutralized. Beautiful work, Lisa replied. But we've got company coming from the south? Looks like they're trying to surround us. Jake and Dan were already moving. They had rehearsed this withdrawal dozens of times. While Jake provided covering fire, Dan packed their equipment. Then they leapfrogged to the next position, always staying ahead of the enemy. The Zephyrians had finally learned to coordinate their attacks. 3 separate groups were converging on Jake's last known position. But when they arrived, they found only empty ground and spent bullet casings. Where did they go? Lieutenant Vexcall demanded. He was the third officer to take command after. His predecessors had been killed. His soldiers searched the area but found no trace of the snipers. The humans had vanished like smoke, leaving only death behind them. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Admiral Vexstar is demanding an immediate update." Vexcall looked at the bodies scattered across the battlefield. In 6 hours of fighting, his forces had lost over 100 soldiers. They had not killed a single human. They had not even seen a human. "Tell the Admiral we need reinforcements," he said quietly. "Many reinforcements?" From his new position, Jake watched the aliens search the empty hillside. They moved carefully now, checking every rock and shadow. They were learning to be afraid, which was exactly what he wanted. "Fear makes them stupid," he explained to Dan. "Scared soldiers make bad decisions." As if to prove his point, one group of aliens became separated from the others. They were trying to check a cave system, but they had not posted sentries. They had not secured their retreat route. They were focused on what might be in front of them, not what might be behind them. Jake's rifle spoke again. The rearmost alien fell silently. The others did not notice for almost a minute. When they finally turned around, they found their comrade's body and no sign of the killer. "Ghost warfare," Don muttered. "Psychological operations at its finest." The aliens began to break. Some units refused to advance. Others fired at shadows and imagined enemies. A few groups simply sat down and waited for orders that never came. Admiral Vexstar watched his forces disintegrate from orbit. His tactical display showed units scattered across the battlefield, all reporting contact with an enemy they could not find or fight. "Prepare for general withdrawal," he ordered. "All units return to the landing craft." "Sir, that would mean admitting defeat to a handful of primitives." Vexstar looked at the casualty reports. Over 200 dead, countless wounded. "Morale completely destroyed. And still no confirmed kills of human soldiers. The primitives are winning," he said quietly. "Perhaps it is time we learned from them." The third day of fighting began with silence. No Zephyrian troops moved from their landing craft for 2 hours after sunrise. Admiral Vexstar had spent the night receiving angry messages from the Imperial High Command. They wanted to know how a primitive species was holding off the Empire's finest military forces. "Sir," Commander Kellenhoff reported, "the troops are refusing to leave the landing zones. They say the humans have supernatural powers." Vexstar felt a pain in his chest. Supernatural powers. His soldiers, trained from birth to conquer galaxies, were afraid of humans with simple rifles. What kind of supernatural powers? "They believe the humans can become invisible at will, that they can kill from any distance. Some think the humans are demons sent to punish us." This was worse than defeat. This was the complete breakdown of military discipline. Vexstar had seen it happen to other species they had conquered, but never to his own forces. Order them to advance. Any soldier who refuses will be executed for cowardice. But threats only made things worse. The Zephyrian troops knew that staying in the landing craft meant possible execution. Going into the field meant certain death from invisible enemies. Colonel Amy Walsh watched the alien landing zones through her command scope. She was Jake Morason's superior officer, hidden in a bunker 3 kilometers from the battlefield. "Jake, they're not moving. Looks like you broke them." Jake's voice came through the radio from his 6th fighting position. "Not broken, ma'am. Just scared. Scared soldiers are dangerous soldiers. They do unpredictable things." Jake was right to be cautious. Fear could make people do desperate things, but it could also make them make terrible mistakes. Finally, the aliens moved, but not the way they had before. This time, they came out in one massive group. Over 1,000 soldiers clustered together like a herd of frightened animals. They stayed so close that their energy shields overlapped, creating a glowing bubble of protection. "Well, that's interesting," Don Collins said through his spotting scope. "They think there's safety in numbers." Jake studied the alien formation. They had learned that spreading out made them vulnerable to snipers, so now they were doing the opposite. They were bunching together so tightly that they could barely move. "Classic mistake," Jake said. "They're solving the wrong problem." Lieutenant. Lisa Parker was now in position on the opposite side of the valley. Jake, I count over 1,000 targets in that formation. They're packed like sardines in a can. Perfect, Jake replied. Time to teach them why clustering is a bad idea. The massed Zephyrian formation moved slowly across the valley floor. They could not move fast because they were so tightly packed. They could not see clearly because of all the energy shields. They could not respond quickly because there were too many soldiers trying to coordinate. Jake did not fire immediately. Instead, he let them get deeper into the valley, farther from their landing craft. He wanted them committed to their position before he started the lesson. Dan, you see that fuel tank on the big guy's back? The one in the center of the formation? Don adjusted his scope. Got it, looks like some kind of power cell for their weapons. What do you think happens if I put a bullet through it? Don grinned. Only one way to find out. Jake lined up his shot carefully. The fuel tank was a small target surrounded by 1,000 enemy soldiers. But it was exactly the kind of shot he had trained for his entire career. The rifle cracked. The bullet struck the fuel tank dead center. The explosion was spectacular. The alien's power cell detonated like a small bomb. The explosion triggered the power cells of nearby soldiers. Within seconds, a chain reaction tore through the center of the formation. Purple flames and white-hot energy bolts flew in every direction. The tightly packed formation became a death trap. Soldiers could not escape because there were too many bodies in the way. They could not help their wounded because of the continuing explosions. They could not fight back because they did not know where the attack had come from. Secondary explosions, Don reported with professional interest. Looks like their power cells are not properly shielded. Jake was already firing again. Not at soldiers this time, but at more power cells and fuel tanks. Each hit caused another explosion, spreading panic and destruction through the alien ranks. Lisa joined in from her position. She could not hit the center of the formation, but she could pick off soldiers trying to escape around the edges. Her bullets found targets struggling to get away from the burning chaos in the middle. This is target practice now, she reported. They're running in straight lines, completely exposed. The massed formation collapsed completely. Soldiers scattered in every direction, abandoning their weapons and wounded comrades. Some ran back toward the landing craft. Others fled toward the hills. Many simply lay on the ground, too shocked to move. Admiral Vexstar watched the disaster unfold from his bridge. His tactical display showed his forces scattered across kilometers of terrain. The neat formation had become a spreading stain of chaos and panic. Casualty report, he demanded. Unknown, sir. Communications are disrupted. We estimate at least 300 dead or wounded in the initial explosions. From how many attackers? Still unknown, sir. Possibly 1 or 2 snipers based on the pattern of fire? Vexstar sat down heavily in his command chair. 1 or 2 humans had just destroyed a formation of over 1,000 trained soldiers. This was beyond military defeat. This was humiliation on a galactic scale. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving surrender requests from ground units. Surrender? Vexstar could not believe what he was hearing. Zephyrian soldiers do not surrender, but they were surrendering. Small groups of aliens were laying down their weapons and raising their hands. They had heard about human mercy from other species. They hoped the humans would treat prisoners better than they treated enemies. Jake watched the surrendering aliens through his scope. This presented a new problem. His mission was to defend the human settlement, not to take prisoners. But shooting surrendering enemies went against everything he had been taught. Control, this is Sniper Team 1. We have enemy forces attempting to surrender. Request instructions. Colonel Walsh's voice came back immediately. Do not fire on surrendering troops. Repeat, do not engage enemies who have laid down their weapons. Copy that, Control. But what do we do with them? Nothing. Your job is to neutralize threats, not manage prisoners. The surrendering troops are no longer threats. This created an interesting situation. The aliens who kept fighting became targets for Jake's rifle. The ones who surrendered were left alone. Word spread quickly through the Zephyrian ranks that surrender. meant safety. More and more alien soldiers began laying down their weapons. They walked into open ground with their hands raised, hoping the invisible snipers would spare them. "Sir," Lieutenant Vexcall reported to Admiral Vexstar, "over half our ground forces have surrendered or fled. The remaining units are requesting immediate extraction." Vexstar stared at his tactical display. In 3 days of fighting, his forces had been reduced from 3,000 combat-ready soldiers to a few hundred scattered survivors, and they had not killed a single human. "How many humans are we fighting?" he asked quietly. "Intelligence estimates suggest between 5 and 10 snipers, sir. 10 humans had defeated 3,000 Zephyrian soldiers." The mathematics of this defeat made no sense according to any military doctrine Vexstar knew. "Prepare the orbital bombardment," he ordered. "Target the entire valley." "Sir, we still have troops on the surface. Many are wounded and cannot evacuate." "Then they will die as soldiers of the Empire. Better than living as cowards who surrendered to primitives." But even as he gave the order, Vexstar knew that orbital bombardment was not really a victory. It was an admission that his ground forces could not win against human tactics. Jake received the evacuation order from Colonel Walsh. "All sniper teams, immediate withdrawal to extraction points. Orbital bombardment incoming." Jake and Dan packed their equipment quickly. They had planned evacuation routes from every fighting position. As they moved toward the extraction point, Jake looked back at the valley where hundreds of alien soldiers still wandered in confusion. "Lot of scared troops down there," Don observed. "Yeah," Jake replied, "but they learned something today. Maybe next time they'll think twice before laughing at human tactics." The orbital bombardment was still 30 minutes away when Jake's team reached the extraction zone. They had completed their mission. The aliens would bombard empty ground while the humans escaped through underground tunnels. Admiral Vexstar had won the battle through superior firepower. But he had lost something much more important. He had lost the respect of his own troops and the fear of his enemies. The humans had shown the galaxy that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could be defeated by ordinary soldiers with extraordinary skills. The orbital bombardment began exactly 30 minutes after Admiral Vexstar gave the order. Blue beams of energy lanced down from space, turning rock into glass and sand into lightning. The valley where Jake Morrison had fought his sniper war became a crater of melted stone and twisted metal. From his position in the underground bunker system, Jake felt the ground shake with each energy blast. Colonel Amy Walsh sat beside him, monitoring communications from the fleet above. "They're really going all out," she said, watching the seismic readings. "Must be using their heavy bombardment cannons?" Jake cleaned his rifle methodically while the world burned above them. "They're scared, ma'am. Scared enough to glass their own troops rather than fight us on the ground." The bombardment lasted for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, the valley looked like the surface of a dead moon. Nothing could have survived above ground. Admiral Vexstar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The human snipers were finally dead, but 3 days later, intelligence reports began reaching the Admiral that changed everything he thought he knew about the battle. "Sir," Commander Kellano said quietly, "we have received debriefing reports from the survivors we evacuated before the bombardment." "What do they say?" "The soldiers report that they never saw more than muzzle flashes from the human positions. No actual humans, no advanced technology. Just ordinary rifles firing ordinary bullets." Vexstar studied the reports with growing horror. How many humans were they fighting? Based on the pattern of fire and movement, intelligence estimates know. More than 12 individuals, possibly as few as 8. 8 humans had defeated 3,000 Zephyrian soldiers. 8 humans with primitive weapons had forced the Empire to resort to orbital bombardment. The implications made Vexstar's stomach twist. "There must be some mistake," he said. 8 primitives cannot defeat a modern military force, but the evidence was clear. The human snipers had used basic infantry tactics that were thousands of years old. They had hidden in terrain features that any soldier should understand. They had exploited weaknesses that Zephyrian doctrine had created through centuries of fighting conventional enemies. Most disturbing of all, They had done it without any technology more advanced than a rifle scope. 2 weeks after the battle, Jake Morrison sat in a briefing room on the human command ship. Representatives from 12 different star systems had come to hear his report. Word of the Zephyrian defeat had spread across the galaxy faster than light. "Captain Morrison," said Ambassador Helen Carter from the Tau Ceti colonies, "our intelligence. Sources report that the Zephyrian Empire has halted all military operations pending a strategic review. Is it true that you accomplished this with just 12 soldiers?" 11, ma'am, Jake corrected. "We lost Private Kevin Turner in the final bombardment. He stayed behind to guide the evacuation and didn't make it to the bunkers in time." The assembled representatives looked stunned. 11 humans had stopped the most powerful military force in the galaxy. It seemed impossible. "How?" asked General Marcus Webb from the Earth Defense Force. "Their fleet could have destroyed the entire planet." Jake considered his answer carefully. "They thought war was about having the biggest guns and the most soldiers." "Sir, we showed them it's about knowing how to fight." "Explain." "The Zephyrians trained to fight other species who used the same tactics they did. Big formations, energy weapons, direct assaults. They never learned to fight an enemy who used different rules." Jake stood and walked to the tactical display. "Every decision they made played into our hands. When we spread out, they bunched together. When we hid, they stood in the open. When we moved, they stayed still. They made every mistake that gets soldiers killed." Ambassador Carter leaned forward. "But surely they adapted? Learned from their failures?" "They tried, ma'am. But they were thinking like generals when they needed to think like hunters. They brought more troops when they needed better tactics. They used bigger guns when they needed smarter strategies." The truth was simpler than the representatives wanted to believe. The Zephyrian Empire had become so used to winning through superior firepower that they had forgotten how to actually fight. They had become soft, predictable, and vulnerable to anyone who understood real warfare on the Zephyrian homeworld. Emergency sessions of the Imperial Council continued for weeks. Admiral Vexstar had been relieved of command and recalled for questioning. His replacement, Admiral Tekvar, was reviewing every aspect of Zephyrian military doctrine. "The humans used what they call asymmetric warfare," Tekvar reported to the Council. "They avoided our strengths and attacked our weaknesses." "What weaknesses?" demanded High Counselor Vex Prime. "Our soldiers have the finest equipment in the galaxy." "They do, Counselor. But equipment means nothing if you do not know how to use it properly. The humans understood our psychology better than we understood theirs." The Council reviewed footage from the battle, what little existed. The orbital sensors had recorded almost nothing useful. The human snipers had been too small, too well hidden, too unpredictable for the Empire's detection systems to track. "How do we counter this kind of warfare?" asked another counselor. Tekvar had been studying that question for weeks. "We cannot, Counselor, not with our current doctrine. We would need to completely rebuild our military training from the ground up." "That would take decades." "Yes, Counselor. And in the meantime, word of our defeat is spreading across the galaxy. Other species are beginning to question our invincibility." This was the real damage the humans had done. Not just the tactical defeat, but the psychological victory. For centuries, the mere threat of Zephyrian intervention had been enough to maintain peace in their territories. Now that threat was broken. Within a month of the battle, 3 star systems declared independence from the Empire. Their leaders had seen that the mighty Zephyrian military could be defeated by ordinary soldiers with basic weapons. If humans could do it, maybe they could too. Jake Morrison returned to Earth a hero, but he did not feel like one. He had lost good soldiers in the fight. Private Turner would never see his family again. Sergeant Collins had been wounded in the evacuation and would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. But when Jake read the intelligence reports about the Empire's crisis, he understood what they had really accomplished. They had not just won a battle. They had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" Colonel Walsh asked him during his final debriefing. "We defended the colony, ma'am. You did more than that, Jake. You showed the galaxy that humans fight differently than anyone else. Better than anyone else. Jake thought about this. We just use the tactics our grandfathers taught us, ma'am. Nothing special about it. That's what makes it special. Every other species in the galaxy learned warfare from each other. Same weapons, same tactics, same thinking. But humans learned to fight on a world where everybody was human. We had to get creative to survive. She was right. Human military history was full of underdogs who had defeated superior forces through clever tactics and superior training. David and Goliath, the American Revolution, guerrilla wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan. Humans had been perfecting asymmetric warfare for thousands of years. Now, the galaxy was learning what Earth's enemies had learned throughout history. It did not matter how big your army was if your enemy could think faster, move quicker, and fight smarter. 6 months after the battle, the Zephyrian Empire signed a non-aggression treaty with humanity. They agreed to recognize human territorial claims and to avoid human space entirely. In exchange, humans agreed not to share their military tactics with other species, but the damage was already done. The Empire's reputation for invincibility was shattered. Other species began developing their own asymmetric warfare capabilities. The galaxy entered a new age where military power was measured not just by the size of your fleet, but by the skill of your soldiers. Jake Morrison retired from active duty and returned to his farm in Montana. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit on his porch and look up at the stars. He knew that somewhere out there, alien generals were studying his tactics and trying to understand how 12 humans had changed the course of galactic history. The answer was simple, though they might never understand it. Humans had learned to fight by fighting each other. In a galaxy of species who had achieved peace through conquest, that made humans the most dangerous warriors in the universe. The Galactic Empire had laughed at human tactics. They were not laughing anymore.